Hello everyone. So today we're going to have a discussion about the question, how we can make sure what we do in soft robotics, especially if we are in the lab, is going to be beneficial for people maybe who work in maybe in industry or people outside of robotics field. That's a question, I think that's a very challenging question. And maybe since we speak about soft robotics in academia, I think maybe we have here diverse, we have Rupert maybe in academia here and also industry aspect. And Ali is doing a really amazing job about Flow.io. But maybe I want to ask you, Robert, since you are in academia, and when you start choosing the problem in soft robotics, what really makes you decide what's your solution or problem you choose to work on? Can you tell us about the process when you start to think about, well, I choose problem XYZ, in which basis you choose that?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this process changes continuously. So there's not just one fixed process to that. I think one main influencer is what you get funded for. So and it's very biased because the people who give you the funding in academic realm are also academics. So it's like one blind person leading the other blind person towards thinking it's a great idea to work on this problem. But before it even comes to writing a grant proposal or to even just writing your professorship application, which is by itself a grant proposal in some sense, it is the question of first of all, what interests oneself, because there's, as you saw from Ali's talk, there's thousands of different directions you can take this, from art to medicine to just typical engineering or like construction work, right? What problem to tackle? It's very difficult. So I go by what interests me, like what is interesting to me. And then that's going to be probably the thing that drives me forward. And then you have all the other people in soft robotics that will pick something that they're interested in. So, and then from that, I would say I go interview people from outside of the robotics domain, from outside the soft robotics or general robotics domain, trying to meet people in the hospital, trying to meet people in industry, trying to make these connections, trying to see what they have for problems, and then read a lot of news, read a lot of like different articles, journalists, what they think is important, trying to see what are the problems in the world, and those things then influence my reasoning. They will influence the first 2 paragraphs of my grant writing process in some sense. And then hopefully it sticks. Hopefully it finds, if then the method I want to apply to then solve this problem seems to be feasible, seems to make sense, seems to add up, then I might get the funding for it. But that's my answer.
I want to ask you this question because I think when we look in soft robotics field, some applications, sometimes you're wondering what's the immediate significance of what we do. And whether we have to do for application, just application, or do fundamental work. And it seems we tied with funding. But do you think, because we have in the room, the leaders in the also field, so do you think there's something should consider that we make sure what we do here in the lab, because we have humanitarian side, like what we saw from License Talk, or something like product? I think that's the process. But can you comment quickly on what's missing, that if you imagine that what you do, that you have to have direct impact, because sometimes it's something cool presented, but what's the impact?
There you go. I think if we could change the way of how funding is being given out, maybe that would have direct impact on it, right? So like some of my funding I get from industry partners, and they have their own agenda of what they think will make a great product and what they need to outsource to an academic to do in terms of research development. Like they don't have the capacity to do this in their company, so they ask a university. That doesn't work very often. It only works with certain companies, the ones that have the extra budget to do so. But for all of these like problems that go beyond, like I've worked on a blind navigation device during my PhD, as some of my PhD. And one of the things that we found was the only reason why we were able to do this was because Andrea Bocelli donated a huge amount of money to say, I would like to see such a device because I'm personally vested in this problem, because I have that problem. And I would like the whole community to benefit from a device that would help a blind person. But these things are not usual. It's like these are very niche, sort of like a donor, someone has a lot of money can give that out. Very often, the national science foundations of all the countries, they are run by the other academics. They don't really know what the problems are. So, and I'm an assistant professor, so I don't have a strong influence on those systems, to be honest. Like I can't greatly influence how these grant funding agencies run. But if they could maybe have the final call always be done by someone on the other end, on the receiving end, on the needs end, that say, hey, these are the major development goals that we need to tackle in our world. And this grant needs to tackle this. And I want to make a say in this, and not just those 5 academics that say this is a great grant. That would be my opinion.
Maybe I want to go for another point, since we have a discussion about in robotics. When we look to the players today in the robotics markets, we have the rigid robots and soft robotics, but it seems we don't have a lot. There's few players already in the market. And the question is how we make sure what we do could be transferred to the market. And the hot question is how we make sure we have a reliable case that could be, have interest of the end user and also investors. Maybe you can quickly, from your vision, you have been a couple of years in industry, or maybe can you tell us how you make sure certain technology makes significance as a product? Because sometimes you have something maybe very interesting, but you don't have the case to be deployed in real market. What is the criteria for that?
Well, and that's a sorry, a broad topic. It's interesting though, and I mean the journey that you're going through, and that what you displayed there was outstanding. So tip of the hat. It's difficult to make that jump from the lab to the real world, as you know. And so what we find is that a lot of times, and this is both with with the Easy Robot went through this as well, because it was founded by an inventor that was super passionate about programming and robotics, made an incredible platform, but wasn't able to get it over that threshold where it was a viable product, right? And, lots of attempts, and he had a difficult time, crossing that chasm. And, really what it takes, I think, is a robust team. And this is really important, and something that I would love to see happening maybe within universities. I think this would be really wise, and is to try to pair the business faculty with the research faculties to come up with viable products, right? And instead of the business faculties working on, some non-real project, maybe they could be working on the same projects as the researchers are working on to try to come up with viable business opportunities and stuff, because it is very different skill sets. And the founder of Easy Robot, DJ Schurz, had an interesting way of putting it. He's like, okay, we're not getting enough sales. So his response to not enough sales is, I need to invent new products that we can sell. And the right response is probably, I need to get a bigger distribution channel to sell the products that we have. But it's a different mindset. And really, it is almost, it's probably not a left brain, right brain thing, but it is just very different skill sets. And one of the things that I would love to see happen in the future, and hopefully we can bring this out, is there's always robotics competitions and stuff, but I would love to see robotics competitions that are real world applications where you've got researchers, like if we're going to work with a university, we want the researchers working with the business people, working with the, the programmers, working with all the different faculties, bring them together on a project that is viable and that can be launched then from the university. And then all of the stakeholders are in a position where they can all prosper.
Can you give an example to make it clear? Maybe if you can just pinpoint exactly what you mean about viability here.
Okay, so let's go to your sample there. Like you've got an incredible solution that's bringing incredible benefit, but one of the challenges that you'll face at some point is probably scaling, getting consistent revenue through the door and stuff. And if there's a business, if you could partner with the business faculty to raise capital, to get outside of the grant funding model, right? Because the product is very interesting. I was sitting there watching it going, I talk to Ali about partnering on this because that's pretty cool, right? So as a private company, we're trying to build a reseller network around the world, right? And then what we want to be able to do with that reseller network is find people that are creating innovation and then bring that in, to the distribution channel. And I mean, building a reseller model is a huge lift as well. We've been doing it for a decade, right? So it's not fast. But something like that is probably what needs to happen. I'm not saying this is what needs to happen in your scenario, but just in that type of situation where what you've built is is very robust and very thorough. And it's just kind of a question of trying to find that capitalization model or that way to create a steady stream. You identified it as well in your presentation. But I just think that within universities, you've got faculties that have different skill sets and different connections, right? That I think that if you can leverage that within your schools, then there's the opportunity to do great things.
Back to that. Maybe I'll switch to Ali here. Since you start the flow, how you envision that you have to come up with this idea that could help maybe give people accessibility to this tool, for example. In terms of the design, do you care about, when you started, like simplicity? Did you care about the end user? Because I asked you, if we speak about people in soft robotics field, maybe younger researchers or maybe people outside the field, when you try to design consideration for your model to make something on the other side, people can perceive it in a good way and also have impact to learn, starting to push them. What is the design consideration at the beginning to think? Because sometimes it's not clear at the beginning how you design certain tools that could help people.
Thank you for the question. Starting the project began as a personal project, more or less, intended to solve my own challenges that I was facing as a researcher when developing various interactive applications. At the start of my PhD, I was exploring a few different things in interactive interfaces and assistive technology and more. And that's when I was just learning about this whole field of soft robotics. And I just found that the challenges that I was facing myself when it comes to the time necessary to just go from an idea to project, about 80% of our time was spent on building things that were not directly related to the goals of the project. They were just necessary in order to make the final project that we were after, an interface or assistive device, for example. And as I started talking with more and more people in this area, coming from an HCI background mostly, but also soft robotics, I found that they were also facing exactly the same kind of challenges, that they would have to develop their own solution, which is custom for the specific project they were making, and there wasn't really any viable general purpose solution. There have been a few attempts of making similar solutions, none of which have been sufficient in a fully general way. So that was kind of the start of this project, and then as initially this was done again more for a small subset of projects, but then over time I learned that there were people who needed even more features to be added to the project, and it became obvious that a modular approach is the way to go, so that you can simply plug and play different modules with different features that would then be suitable for people who need very miniaturized device with maybe smaller flow rate and pressures, or a slightly bigger device, but with much higher flow rates and pressure. So in terms of the hardware design, that was kind of the aspect. One thing I want to just mention is that even though this seems like a hardware project, about 30% of the effort into this project is actually hardware, 70% is software, and I'm not even including all of the effort that went into all of these other categories beyond just the first category of hardware and software. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
You can answer for sure. Yes, absolutely.
So you said something in there that I think tied into what you had asked me a second earlier, which is, how do they become viable products? How do you build something that is sustainable? And one of the comments that you made, I really kind of hit me there, which is, you said something like 80% of the time that you're spending on it isn't dedicated to your goal. right? Like it, and this is a really important thing. If you're sitting out there and you're building your research and you're looking for people to collaborate with, I would strongly suggest that what you need to find are people that are maniacally passionate about what you're doing, but that have a completely different skill set. And this was really important with the Easy Robot platform. I mean, it's a 10-year-old product. And we were in pretty good shape pre-COVID, right? There's been some ups and downs and stuff like that, but we were in pretty good shape pre-COVID, and COVID beat us up. But still, it took 8 years. And, you know, when I talk about people that are passionate, I got involved not because I'm big on robotics. I got involved because I'm big on humanity and recognize the impact robotics and AI were going to have. And so, you know, for the first 8 years, I probably paid myself a total of, I don't know, $120,000, $130,000 over 8 years, like impossible starvation type money. And I was still there because I cared that much about the goal. And the interesting thing is the person that is the founder, that is the genius behind the product, he cares about it that strongly for different reasons. And so if you guys are looking, you know, if you're looking to partner with other people, whether they're different faculties or whatever, try to find partners that are really passionate about the impact you're going to have. Simon Sinek would say it's, you know, it's all about the why, right? But if you can get people that are passionate and care, but that have different skill sets, then you're on your path.
I want to ask again, you mentioned the point about the right people. That's a really good point, to have the right people in the right time, place to do the things. Maybe I want to ask you, Robert, when you try to think about the field, I think I talked before with you about that, but I ask you this question, and I would like to ask you again about if you have any criticism about the way we do research of robotics overall. Do you have any things that you can share with people? We have to have these different views that maybe we should consider different things or different priorities. Do you have any criticism or something you hold like you don't agree with saying that should lead to answer question? I will make sure what we do, at least in the lab, lead to beneficial step, hopefully outside of what we do in academia.
So it's a question about my crutches that I can now let go. Maybe I'm not prepared for this, but I would say, and I'm guilty of this myself, that in academia, it's very often you're publishing an idea, and the rigor that goes into comparing it to making a product, comparing it to making Flow.io, comparing it to make Easy Robot or any other thing, it's just you need to convince a small circle of people that this seems to be a great idea. And very often the long-term questions, this humanity question, is like, how does this actually impact the real world? How will this thing that you just invented, even though you're just showing the first step of it, but it's never being really asked to then extrapolate all the way to the point that this in the end, can this in the end deliver payload? Can in the end be scalable? Will it be sustainable for the environment? Or is it just another piece of trash that's just gonna flood in our oceans? And all of these things, I feel like there should be a whole set, like a whole checklist of things that as we are coming up with hundreds of different soft robotic actuators, soft robotic sensors, soft robotic this, soft robotic that, like, are we actually fulfilling these sort of hard criteria that will in the end make, because we know from the business faculty, we know what a product needs to have to become viable. We know from policymakers what a product should not have, so that the EU is not going to sanction you for what you put into this product. And I just wanted to mention, like, for example, we were struggling in our lab with teaching. For the first year, I was teaching the soft robotics class, and we wanted to have a way of quickly scaling to just like 10 groups of people building something soft robotic like, and giving them something to use. And we had just one flow terminal, way too expensive from Festo to use. So we directly reached out to Ali. And I think now we're actually in possession of we have the most of your Flow.io modules, I think, of anyone, right? I just saw it on the website earlier. I think we got 12 of these. Not sure if that's the most, but we're really happy about this, because if other people can help us to go this extra step of us saying, okay, we can build another cool Cripper, another cool soft fish, and someone else helps us to build the remaining infrastructure that wasn't there. Like when I started soft robotics, I was really like looking for the right valves, and I had to then 3D print my own pumps because there was nothing there you could put into the device. And I spent more than 80% of my time just to build everything that did not make my robot swim, or did not make my arm grasp something. So yes, that's great. And that's exactly what we need. We need people who do all the extra steps, who do the commercialization, who think about all of this. And I feel like every academic who publishes a new idea should know what's the playbook down the roads, and at least mention this somewhere in the paper. And the reviewers should be very critical about like, hey, this seems, yeah, it seems fancy. It's like a balloon I can blow up and it's great for a birthday party, but is it going to be really great for humanity to solve this problem? And that's very rarely being asked.
Follow-up question.
Okay.
What is maybe thinking missing pieces so far? You mentioned what you do now, but when you try to think overall, what is missing maybe for your lab and people maybe working in the field?
I mean, one thing I was thinking throughout when I was just seeing Ali's talk, and like we are missing. So we, for example, we have started working with other kind of actuator technologies. So when we work with the Flow IO module, it's mostly about something we do for teaching, but most of our projects will be not using pneumatics anymore in the future. So where do we like, I would be like very eager to say, hey Ali, let's do the electro IO, the zap IO, whatever you want to call it, and let's do this, right? How could we get this funded? How can I have help on this? Because I think it will not just be possible for Ali to do this himself. You also maybe need support from the academic side to do this, because it will help us. If we have this, it will help make our work reproducible. It will help ourselves to scale to many robots quickly, many robots meaning on the orders of a few dozen, right? And it will help industry to adopt the technology, because they can just buy this module, like they could buy in the past an Arduino, they can buy this module and they can adopt it, and it will create a greater impact. And so I don't know if this answers your question, but I think that would be great if we could do something like this and work on high voltage IO devices and so forth.
So since you can have
Real quick. Sorry, this is a personal question here. With the, so we're just starting to plug into the university space, and one of the things that I heard from a professor was that if we're partnering with universities, they can get grant money easily, as long as, or relatively easily, as long as they know there's an output for, you know, for the research, like it's going to go somewhere. Is that an accurate comment? Is that fair?
I think it depends on the grants that you are funded by. So for example, if you're partnering and that means you would directly also fund me, then yes, because you're paying me. But there's very often, like in Switzerland, for example, where I'm from, we have these projects called InnoSwiss, and the way they work is they only work if you have actually a direct outlet towards industry. Either you have directly an industry partner who's willing to chip in some like personnel resources or some vested interest, because they want to see this research becoming a product to help the economy, to build jobs, to create innovation, and to make to create a new market, and to create and I think every country has that. So yes, in these kind of grants, you need to have the industry partner, and it needs to be a perfect match, and the reviewers need to like it. And you have to get lucky that you get the right reviewers who have the right mindset, who see the vision for such a project. But for the other ones, the basic foundational funding, they don't really care if there's a company behind it. They just care if you're asking, scientifically speaking, the foundational questions. If you're solving a foundational problem, they don't care if there's an industry after this. That's too far away. So I would say yes and no.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I want to ask you a question about, I think one interesting story, I think we touched it today, about Jaibo, for example, by Sense Brazil, and it was a fiasco that the company already bankrupted. And I already had her in the podcast and asked her a question, and I think it was interesting her perspective about the failure process. When we have something like what we saw Jaibo or other robotic example, there's two elements here about the price, for example, and how you get the right story to the end user. Also, Beeper closed last year because it's the same element. You have a technology, you have the price, you have the right story to the end user to be convinced. How do you see these three play together? If you have speak rigid robotics or soft robotics.
I think, I think the story is obviously, and this goes back, we chatted briefly about this yesterday. And I thought that your story here was excellent, right? Like in terms of like, I'm coming kind of halfway in between, right? Of, VCs or whatever, but the why part of that is really important in terms of, and this would be true for hard robotics and soft robotics. The why gets the sale, the why gets the investment, the why gets the inspiration, right? And a lot of times, this is interesting. I think this goes back to, I'm going to diverge for just a second. A lot of times what we see within high schools is we'll have a principal and the principal will say, oh, I should be teaching robotics. It's coming on strong. So they'll be like, okay, I'm going to teach robotics. I'm going to bring this in. Their very next thought is, who do I have on my staff that can teach robotics? Who is my most engineering-minded teacher? And the interesting thing from that is that the engineering-minded teacher creates an engineering program that appeals to engineering kids. And so then we end up with curriculum and lesson plans that are like, let's have a robot that follows a line. Well, nobody, apart from the most purely minded engineers, nobody cares about a robot that follows a line. That's not intrinsically important to anybody. And so, when we look at something like Jibo or something like that, it's like, oh, here's going to be a companion, right? And they're selling a dream. They're selling a creepy or not relationship with this companion, right? And it gets lots creepier than Jibo. But the story is very important. And then as consumers, we have to be mindful of, is this story authentic? There's a lot of robots out there that are being sold as something they're just simply not suitable for, right? This is within education. It's outside of education. I won't mention the name of the company, but it was like, it was a security robot and it had little flippers for arms. And I was like, the only thing that's going to do is take a picture of me getting the crap kicked out of me. Right? Like that's not security. Right. But like, I was like, that's not a viable product, but they were pitching it as such, and they were trying to sell that story. Right. So it's really important you've got to be deadly tough on that story. Is it authentic and is it real? And if it is, then you're sitting on something special that can change the world. And if it's not, then it's going to go the way the Jibo goes. Because really, what's Jibo got that Alexa doesn't? Right? Something that spins and has a slightly different voice. In the grand scheme of things, without trying to take a shot at Jibo, so what? Those are two very powerful words. They're not nice words, but so what? Oh, we're doing some research that's going to produce this. So what? If you can't answer so what, it's so much harder to get the money. It's so much harder to get the sale, right? You have to go that extra step. And what you were just talking about there. It's like, does this meet the research thresholds? Is it a foundational problem that we're solving? Great, but if you can frame that foundational problem around a good story about that so what, then that will move mountains and open doors.
I would ask Ali, I think, since you have this robust model, I think, about accessibility, I think it's interesting that when you try to design something, maybe initial stages, that how you make sure certain people get access to this material and other not at early stages. Can you tell about the accessibility? If someone inside the field or outside of the field, since you're on the early stages, who get access and who doesn't get access for that?
Yeah, thanks for this question. It's interesting, when you are in university, you have certain limitations that you might not have if you are a company. For example, as a university at MIT, we cannot sell any products, even if there is hundreds of people, as is the case with this platform. We cannot actually make any sale because of MIT being a nonprofit institution and so on. So one of the biggest challenges, in fact, that I faced when it came to this project was, how do I make a platform that actually people can obtain while I am still a student, without necessarily establishing a commercial entity and still not violating any rules within MIT. And so this was the constraint that I actually faced that led me to ultimately come up with this new deployment model, which I presented in my talk, where the device is basically given completely free of charge, and there are donations that support the number of devices that we can give either in a fully assembled form or as a kit of parts for people to assemble themselves. And so the process of who gets a device is also something that has been to some extent formalized. Every week there is, I'm not sure, there's like dozens of people who send me questions on emails requesting devices and such. So over the course of the past year, I have tried to actually raise the level of threshold for what it takes to obtain a Flow device. In the very early phase of this project, I would more or less just try to make it possible for anyone who requests a device to obtain one. Then in the subsequent phase, I made it necessary for people to have to make an account on the website. Then they had to say about a sentence or two about why they are requesting it. And now I have a requirement of 200 to 500 word proposal. So I'm trying to select people who actually can make the most impact for the evolution and the growth of this project based on the proposal that they submit and based on the potential for the project that they create, based on their own potential and based on the contribution that they might bring to the software robotics.io ecosystem. That's kind of how the selection process works.
So I think a few questions and maybe we can.
So I understand that the resources are the biggest limitation at the moment. Like how quickly, particularly with like global supply chain issues that may be solved at this point already, but at least for the better part of the last year, there were definitely supply chain issues. So resources are a problem. It's the time to assemble these systems. Maybe it's a good thing to make it hard to access because it increases the interest or the desirability of things. Like if you make something, I remember the long lines outside of the Apple stores for most of my youth of like people telling me they're camping outside the Apple store because there will be not so many Apple iPhones to be sold on the first day. But I think long term, it's problematic for something to scale because these days anyone can buy an Arduino and can buy tons of them, right? And it's really just a question, are you willing to pay the price of whatever the knockoff or the original model costs you? And so I'm not quite sure if I'm very much in favor of this process for the long term, because let's say if my students, they really like the class and they worked with the Flow IO device, and then they go out and many of them go into industry and they might go to the employer and they have been using DC motors for all that they know of. And they say, hey, we can solve this problem with this Flow IO device and it's going to be innovative and the company can create a benefit in their niche market. But we can't buy it because I need to write, just like my professor did, a proposal to Ali. And then Ali might say, fingers up or thumbs down. And not sure if that's going to be the right model, right? So what's the plan on scaling then?
Exactly. So this goes back to my starting point, which is that you have certain limitations while you are still in academia. And this is partly related to or mostly related to time. While I'm still in academia, I have also another hugely important aspect to satisfy, which is as part of my PhD, I'm doing this framework, and I have to demonstrate, or my intention is to demonstrate different application possibilities within different domains. So, for example, if I have, say, 10 hours a week that I can spend on this project, then during those 10 hours, it would make most sense for me to give them to projects that can demonstrate a drastically different application as opposed to an application that I already have an example of. But once I am past the academic phase, that is, once I go outside of MIT, then I would have more opportunity that might be in the form of establishing a formal nonprofit entity or a commercial entity or something else. And that's when those challenges that you mentioned of scalability can be addressed. But it's very difficult to address them while you are still a student, unless you also start a company, which in itself is going to maybe result in some political problems with your institution, especially if you are doing a startup as a student, and then that startup is also part of your research. Yeah.
Just a quick question. Have you thought about asking someone else to do that startup? Like someone who doesn't have the academic rigor of having to complete the thesis, but just interested in the mission, in the joining that why and saying, oh, I would love to make this become a company.
Yep, exactly. There have been some people I worked with. However, there is one thing I noticed, which is that when you are working with people who are not necessarily sharing the same objectives as you, they might pull you toward more business oriented aspect. But in my case, I'm trying to satisfy both the community or deployment aspect, at the same time satisfy the academic objectives. So I'm trying to integrate both of these objectives. And if one party is purely focused on the business objective, they might not understand the academic objective you're also trying to satisfy with that project. And so that tends to create some tensions. Yeah.
Just a real quick question. And just when you said you had 10 hours, like if I've got 10 hours this week to work on this, this might be really silly or smart, I don't know. Can you offload a bunch of that manual labor that you might be doing to like high school students? Can you partner with a high school and bring in a bunch of free labor to help you scale before you're up and running?
That's exactly the idea when I mentioned about the deployment model, which is that for a person to obtain the device, I now explicitly expect them to make some contribution to the project, which can be hardware development, software development, writing a tutorial, creating a YouTube video, or just anything else in the form of labor, or it could be helping financially with donation or helping with fundraising so that others can donate. So yeah, exactly. That's already part of what I'm doing. Okay. Although creating the framework, creating the infrastructure to accept such kinds of contributions, I found to actually be quite challenging. And you need to have also significant amount of time just to manage people, which in itself turns out to be very time consuming. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Fair comment.
Okay, so thank you everyone. And yeah, thank you, and also thanks for that.